Okay, welcome everyone. It's amazing to have the honor of starting a 6-part series on the Torah portion of the week, the parasha, and we are starting at a pretty amazing piece of Torah with the story of Noach and a flood and an ark and animals. I'll tell you something. You couldn't have begun discussing the portion of the week at a more exciting and amazing time. And yet the name of the hero of our story and the name of the entire parsha, the name of the entire chapter that we're going to look into is Noach. The name Noach means at rest. The things are calm. And yet, the story of Noach and his family and a flood and animals is the furthest thing from anything calm and tranquil. So what exactly is this story really all about? What is the calmness that the Torah is trying to hint at that this story is going to bring to us? So let's just get some context, because this is the second portion of the Torah. Well, things started off great, amazing, delicious, exciting. We had Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and everything was beautiful and everything was delicious and delightful. And God said, you could eat the first command to them, you could eat whatever you want in the garden, every single fruit, but there's one tree, the Eitz Hadat, the tree of knowledge, Tov v'Ra, and good and bad. That one tree you can't have. And as we all know, whenever you say to young children, you can have it all except that one thing, that's the one thing they're going to want to have. And that's precisely what happened to Adam and Eve. They ate from the fruit, and from that point on, things declined rapidly. So the beginning of the Torah began in the book of Bereshit with a big, colossal mistake, the hate, the sin of Adam and Eve, and then things went down and they continued going down until we meet the hero of our story, until we meet Noach. Now, Noach, my friends, is described in unusual terms. The Torah tells us, if you have a Chumash, a Bible open in front of you, that would help a lot. They are in the book of Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, chapter 6, verse 9. That is where our Torah, that is where our Parsha opens. And it opens with a rather cryptic statement. Ele toldot Noach. These are the generations of Noach. Noach. Wow, it's like a stutter. These are the generations of Noach. Noach. What do you mean these are the generations of Noach? Who are the generations of Noach? His 3 sons. Shem, Ham, Yafet. And yet the Torah, the Bible, does not tell us immediately who these people are. Seemingly, the Torah is telling us something very, very important. That yes, Noach does have generations, and he has children, and he has a wife, and he has daughter-in-laws, and he's going to have many, many, many descendants coming out of him. And yet the Torah doesn't jump to those people. Very quickly, it goes into Noach. Who are the real descendants of great people? Noach is. Meaning that the real descendants, the real living generations that we leave in this world are ourselves and our good deeds. That is how the Torah opens. Ele tolda Noach. These are the generations of Noach. Who are the real progeny of every person? Who are you really leaving behind? Kids. They're important, no doubt about it. And their kids. And then their kids. And we're going to see a number of generations are going to come out of them. And God willing, us as well. But do you really know your great-grandparents? I mean, your great-great-grandparents? I don't even know my great-great-grandparents' names, right? I know they're buried in Israel on Mount Olives, Har HaZeitim, but more than that, I don't even know. When I visit, I have to, oh, that's their name. There's a Menashe, there's an Esther, and that's about it. We're learning something very important. The real things we leave behind in this world are definitely not our physical things, and even our generations are important, but our good deeds will last forever, especially through our children. And we're given a very beautiful insight into Noah. Ish Tzaddik, he was a very righteous individual. Tamim, he was simple and perfect. Haya Bidrotav, in his generation. Now, here comes a rather unusual statement about Noah. You know what it says about him? And this seems almost, dare I say it, blasphemous, because we just described Noah as being a tzaddik, as a righteous person. But right after it says, Bidrotav, in his generation. Why does it have to say that? Why do we have to crunch down that he's great in his generation? Why can't he just be great? And the commentators make a comparison which on the surface seems unfair, but in the long run is going to teach us a very valuable lesson. Noah was righteous in his generation, but had he lived in the generation of Abraham, which is going to be 10 generations later, he wouldn't have been anything that special. Why is the Torah making this comparison between Noah and Abraham? We just met Noah, and already we're comparing, and the Torah doesn't really like comparisons. People are judged against their own actions. As I like to say, compare leads to despair. Compare leads to despair. When you compare yourself to other people, you're going to end up despairing because you're not really held accountable according to other people. You're held accountable according to your own deeds, your own actions, and your own self. Noah is compared to Noah. And yet over here, very quickly, there's a hint that he's being compared to Abraham. And maybe we can answer this question. There's many answers to this question. None of them really, as far as I'm concerned, are as good as the question itself. But maybe we can understand that we, as readers of the Torah, as viewers of world and Jewish history, need to see that some people do very well in their generation. But if we want to make a long-lasting impact on society, become the Abraham people, we're going to have to do a lot more. Because there were things that Noah was not successful in doing. One major thing. You see, Noah is going to be tasked with saving humanity. And in that sense, he failed. It's going to take 10 generations for Abraham to appear and be able to influence not only his generation, but many generations to come. So although Noah is not being compared in terms of, oh, you're terrible compared to Abraham. That's a childish way of looking at it. We're saying that Noah achieved greatness for himself and his family and generation. But for future generations, not so much. That's going to take time until we reach the time of Avraham Avinu, until we reach the time of Abraham. And so we have a problem. Noah had a problem. And that is he lived at a time of people who were really, really bad. What were they doing? Hamas. What does Hamas mean? Stealing. They were being bad to each other. They stole each other's things, and they stole each other's children, and they stole each other's husbands and wives. That, says the Torah, is already a wrong start on bad footing. When you treat each other badly, God has a very low tolerance rate. You know, there's going to be two arcs we're going to look at in this week's Torah portion. The first ark is a physical ark, a large ship-like creation that Noah himself spent a long decades building in order to save himself, his wife, and his kids. It was actually meant to be for all of humanity. He didn't achieve that, unfortunately. That's the first ark. But the second ark is not a physical ark. It's an ark that's going to take us from the beginning of the portion, Torah portion, to the end of the Torah portion. Because although Noah and his wife and kids are going to survive, There's going to be another generation soon after this one called the generation of the Haflaga, the separation. You may know them as the generation of the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Babel. And that generation was also bad. And there's an arc leading from one to the other. You see, Noah was dealing with a generation of people who were really bad to each other. And we're going to see that this generation forfeited their right to life. Forfeited their right to life. And God wiped them out after a lot of warning and a lot of chances for repentance. And yet, at the end of the Torah portion, we're going to follow that arc. We're going to jump to the punchline. There's going to be another generation. This generation, the Tower of Babel generation, also rebelled and were very bad. And they deserve to be destroyed for what they did, just like the generation of Noah. And yet God didn't destroy them. Why? There's one important, crucial difference we have to lock down right now. And that is the generation of the Tower of Babel, who appear at the end of the Torah portion, were bad and rebelled against God. That tower that they built wasn't meant to be a way to reach heaven. It was actually a statement of, we don't need God. We're so technologically advanced, and they were, by the way, greater than we realize, that we are rebelling against God. But they work together to fight against God. And God says, you know what? You're coming against me. You want to wipe me, my name out of this world? That's bad. But at least there's unity among you. For that reason, I'm not going to wipe you out. I'm going to spread you out to show that you're actually going to need me on all four corners of the earth. And you're going to have to be dependent on me as a higher power. The people of Noah, however, the generation of the flood, those people were not permitted to live. Why? Because although they didn't rebel against God, they rebelled against each other. And God, this is a very crucial piece of information you must know because it's relevant today. God has a higher tolerance rate for people who rebel against him, i.e. Tower of Babel, versus people who are bad and nasty to each other. God has a lower tolerance when there is disunity among us. And so what starts with Noah and the people bad against each other, stealing and kidnapping and adultery, and actually literally stealing men and women from under the chuppah. They're about to get married, whatever that means, and they would grab them away from each other. This, God says, that I don't have time for. You want to hate me and be against me, you want to be an atheist, no problem. Well, not no problem, but that's understandable. There's a fix-up for that. But being bad and evil to each other, that I can't deal with, and that generation needed to be wiped out. Now, why water? Why an ark? And why animals? That's going to be the big question we need to ask in order to figure out why that was chosen as the right way to fix Noah and his family. And obviously the people who were left on earth. Okay, so let's start with one quick, very crucial piece of information. And it goes like this. The Torah, and actually all of Jewish history, and actually all of world history, is not a history of events. You see, if we go back to the beginning of the Torah, we have a few verses, 15, 20 verses, that describe the creation of the world, the universe, and everything. But very quickly, almost too quickly, we move from the description of creation of the heavens, the earth, and the universe, and the stars, and the planets, and very quickly, we start to talk about people. Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, and mistakes that they make. Why is that? Because the way the Torah and we as Jews look at history is not a history of events, like Marxian history. According to Marx, history is just upheavals of events that go up and down throughout history. That's not the way we look at history. We do not look at history a history of events. We look at it as a history of people. And very quickly we realized that one person can make a massive change for the bad. Cain kills Abel, Adam and Eve sin in the Garden of Eden, to good, Noah saving and Abraham saving. And so we go from 10 generations from Adam to Noah, another 10 generations from Noah to Abraham, who's going to appear at the end of the Torah portion. We want to know about people and what they do. That's going to make the big and crucial difference for society and world history. And so we see that Noah was chosen because he's the Ish Tzaddik, he's the righteous person, and he's the one who's going to save humanity. And he's told to build an ark. And the building of the ark takes a long time. Now God could have, had he wanted to, made an ark appear out of thin air. Why does he make Abraham and his wife and kids and son-in-law, daughter-in-laws work so hard for so long so that people could see them and be like, no, what are you doing? It's like building an ark. Why? I got some bad news. We've actually messed up and God is going to wipe us out. But we could fix it right and we can make it good. And Noah actually, it's weird to say this, but that's what the rabbis tell us, failed in his mission to change the world. Changing himself, being a righteous individual, yes. Children, yes. But he was so focused on himself and his own family that he couldn't extend himself further beyond his own family, which we already said Abraham is going to do. So what does God decide to do? Wipe out the world. How? Through water. Through water. The use of water is not a coincidence. Water, we know, has a purifying quality. Just like a person immerses into a mikveh. A mikveh is a pool of water that has within it 40 seyah. That is 40 liquid measures of around a gallon or so. The purifying waters of the mikveh can purify. So the entire world was mikvahized. I don't know if that's a word, but it is now. The entire world needed to be submerged in waters, just like a mikveh can purify a person from the worst things. Still, the mikveh waters can change an individual. So too, the waters that came down for 40 days and for 40 nights were able to purify all of planet Earth. There was a new beginning. And so waters were chosen for a very specific reason. They can come and they can purify and they can clean and they can create new beginnings. Let's talk about the number 40, because the number 40 has a major role to play in this week's parasha, this week's Torah portion. You see, the rains came down for 40 days and for 40 nights. That is not a coincidence. God could have flooded the earth in a moment. What is the secret of the number 40? Well, we already hinted at it. The number 40 is going to represent something really, really important. And we see the number 40 appear a number of different places in life, in Jewish history, and in even world history. First of all, we see it over here. The rains came down for 40 days and 40 nights. We already mentioned a mikveh. In order to be kosher, must have a minimum of 40 seyah, 40 liquid measures of water. In order, before that, it's just another pool of water, meaningless. Once you hit the threshold of 40, you now have a brand new reality, something that can change that which is submerged inside it. We know that there are 40 days from the beginning of the month of Elul, which is the month that precedes Tishrei, and Tishrei begins with Rosh Hashanah, and then 10 days later we have Yom Kippur. Added together from the beginning of Elul to Yom Kippur, that's 30 days of Elul, 10 days of Tishrei, till you reach the 10th of Tishrei, which is Yom Kippur, you have 40. And so We all enter into a 40 when we submerge into a mikvah. And we also enter into 40 days from Elul right through to mikvah. That means those are days that are purifiable. There are other 40s. We know that a woman is pregnant for around 40 weeks. So new life, when the baby is submerged, the fetus is submerged in purifying, life-giving liquid. And that lasts for 40 weeks. And we also know that Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest sages in Jewish history, who we're going to learn so much from, we know that for 40 years he was a complete ignoramus. And for 40 years he studied Torah after seeing water drip onto a rock, seeing the indentation that the water formed in the rock. And he said, wow, if water that is so soft can make an indentation in something as hard as stone, so too can Torah, which is like water, come and make an indentation in my head that's like a rock. And so he studied for 40 years. And then he taught Torah for 40 years as well. So Rabbi Akiva's life is divided into 3 sections: 40 years of ignoramus, 40 years of learning, and 40 years of teaching. He died at 120 years old, sadly at the hands of the Romans as a martyr. And so we move to the Torah. And the Torah was given on Mount Sinai. And as we know, for 40 days and 40 nights, Moshe Rabbeinu, was on the mountain. All these 40s have something in common. They are new beginnings. When we read this Torah portion, we're going to think we have the ability to change our life. And it could take 40 days. Because 40 days can change a lot of things. But the number 40 brings us evidence that things can change for the better. And Noach knew this, and even Abraham and Moshe Rabbeinu knew this, and even Rabbi Akiva was aware of the power of the number 40. Okay, why animals? Why is God taking Noach and sticking him on an ark for a whole year while he floods the earth with a bunch of animals? I mean, God can do whatever he wants, right? If God wanted, he could have taken Noach and the animals, because obviously he wants to put them onto a UFO, right? Onto an aeroplane, put them onto El Al and flown them. We all know what El Al stands for. Every landing, always late. But not anymore. Now El Al is onto better things, which, by the way, is better than Delta, which stands for don't expect luggage to arrive, or didn't even leave the airport. But we'll leave that aside. God could have put Noach onto a plane and flown him to Israel. According to the Gemara in Zevachim, the land of Israel is so holy, it wasn't even affected by the flood. Some say the rain didn't even fall in the land of Israel. It didn't need it. It was so holy, it didn't need the flood waters. Some say, no, it did need it, but it didn't land directly. It washed through it. So you know what God could have done? He could have taken Noach, stuck him on Tel Aviv beach, right? And brought all the animals there, brought all the food over there. Dayenu, that would have been enough. He could have sat back together with his wife and kids, right? Have we clocked 40 days? Yes. Have we clocked an entire year? Yes. Dayenu, we're done. They're all dead, and we survived. And yet he didn't do that. He made Noach float around on this ark for an entire year. And in case you think this was a pleasurable experience, it was extremely unpleasant. First of all, it was emotionally unpleasant because he knew what was happening outside. And all the animals, except the fish, come to that another time, were being wiped out. So outside he knew there was chaos. Inside, he literally didn't get to sleep. He's running around, feeding the animals, and we all know that some animals like to be fed at nighttime, and some animals like to be fed during the day. It was so difficult, says the Torah, that he became nauseous. Literally, he was vomiting half the time. And there was refuse on the ship, one layer there were 3 levels of the ship, and one level of the ship was just for waste. My goodness, the stink on the ship. And he couldn't be intimate with his wife. The Torah says Noach and his children couldn't be intimate for the entire year. They couldn't even console each other properly because they knew what was happening outside. There was destruction. And so he's running around. He didn't get to sleep for an entire year. He got like 2 minutes, shluf, up again, feed another animal. They say that it was so difficult at one point, the Midrash tells us that he went to feed a lion. He was a little bit late, and the lion took a bite out of his arm. You would have thought the lion would have been grateful, and yet it wasn't. It attacked Noach. The animals didn't attack each other. One of the great miracles that happened, there were many miracles. The fact that a ship this size could hold this many animals. The whole event was miraculous, but not for Noach. He's walking around and he's vomiting and he's feeding animals, and you can imagine the chaos on this ship. It was not a pleasant year. Why? Why did God do this to Noach? This question is asked by a very great rabbi. I'm going to share with you an idea that can change the way you look at everything you do in life based upon this one central feature, Noach and the animals. In order to get to this, we need to understand something very important, and that is, what was the problem that caused the world to need this purification in the first place, my friends? And the problem was, people were not nice to each other. They were attacking each other. They were hurtful to each other. And even though Noach was not guilty of any bad things, or his wife, or his children, or his daughter-in-laws, they were good people, they were tzaddikim, and that's why they were saved. We know from a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that when a person does bad, they don't just impact themselves, they impact the people who live around them. Oy l'rasha, oy l'shcheno. Bad to a bad person, but even worse to the people who live around them. Which means that Noach was infected with the disease that was prevalent in society around him. Even though he was a great tzaddik and a great righteous person, you cannot help by being affected by bad actions of the people who live around you. And so Noach, to some degree, some internal way, was very negatively impacted by the people that he was living around. What was their problem? In short, they were takers. What is the role of humanity? To become givers. Says Rabbi Dessler, this great rabbi who lived before and after the war, he was a survivor. The world can be divided into 2 groups. Forget nationalities, right? Forget the French and the Russians and the British and the Iranians. Forget that. Forget that. Forget the boundaries that we put in terms of countries, geographic. Forget that. The world is givers and takers. The generation of the time of Noach had one big problem. They were takers. It was all about me, me, me. The iPhone, the iPad, the iWatch, it's all about me. Noach was affected by that, even though he didn't realize it. What did God do? God did something unbelievable. He created a 1-year university to get out of Noach, and hopefully out of all few generations that came out of Noach, the power of taking, and transformed it into the power of giving. How do you take a person who is a taker into a giver? One way and one way only. Make them give. Don't talk about it. Don't think about it. Don't discuss it. Just do it. The power of giving will make you into a giver. The word for love in Hebrew is ahava. Before ahava was an overpriced cream being sold by a bunch of Israelis in the malls around New York, New Jersey, and Vegas and a lot of Florida as well. It was an idea. And the idea is in the word for love, which is ahava. Ahava. The root of the word ahava, say the commentators, is hav, which means to give. How do you generate love between people? You make them give. The mistake that everyone makes when they hear this idea is that they think that if you give somebody something, they're going to love you. But we know that's not true. Noah was giving the animals. They didn't love him. They hated him probably. Hurry up, it's my turn. The Gemara says that the mother loves the child more than the child loves the mother. Why? Because mothers and fathers and parents give, give, give. And what do children do? Take, take, take. That's why we all enter this world with our hands closed, because we're naturally takers. But we all leave this world with our hands open from a lifetime of giving. And so ahava, how do we build love? The secret, my friends, is, hear me well, this could change your life. The secret is the more you give, the more you love. Giving creates love. That means if you give somebody something, they may love you or they may hate you. Depends if they appreciate you. But one thing we know is that the one who gives loves. The love follows the giving. That, my friends, is the secret of Noah. Why did God, says Rabbi Dessler, put Noah onto a ship for an entire year and make him feed animals and clean up after them and all this terrible, horrible work? One reason: to turn Noah and his family and his descendants into givers. The more you give, the more you love. And you couldn't discuss it or talk about it. It only occurs one way, and that is by giving. The power of giving generates love. And so Noah has now become not only a survivor of the flood, but he's become a transitional figure from before the flood to after the flood. Why? Because he was the one who turned society from a selfish, me society that started with Adam and Eve, who took for themselves from the tree of knowledge, and from Cain, who wanted to take for himself, and so he killed Abel, and their descendants right through to Noah and his generation, from takers into givers. That, my friends, is the secret of Noah and the ark. The ark represents something else. The ark, say the rabbis, represents a place of action, but a place of solitude. They were safe in the ark from the 40 days of this acid rain that was coming along to mikvahs, to clear off the surface, the entire crust of the earth, change forever. They were safe and they were sheltered. Say the rabbis, I heard this in the name of the Lubavitch Rebbe, Zechathol Evracha, everyone is obligated to create their own personal ark, their own place of protection from the outside elements. Because outside, especially today, there is a flood raging, and that raging flood is ready to swallow us up. How do we prepare to get out and deal with the outside world? You need to protect yourself inside the ark. What is the ark of safety that we, the Jewish people, have? Two things, says the Rebbe. Number one, the ark of prayer, and number two, the ark of Torah study. We need to carve out in our own lives, and this is very difficult and takes time and practice, times of refuge and shelter, our own arks, when now I'm praying and no one else is going to deal with me. Now I'm learning Torah, this 1 hour a day, 1 hour a week, 5 minutes a week. But that time is precious and no one can take it away from me. I'm in my safe shelter because I'm not going to survive the raging floods that are outside unless I create my own personal ark, my own personal place of shelter and solitude for spiritual success. It's very, very important. Let's talk about another couple of things, and then we'll wrap this up, and then we'll take questions. Someone's asked over here in the chat, why non-kosher animals? Why did God save them? We know they took on pairs so they could reproduce into the future. But as well as that, he took upon himself 7 pairs of kosher animals. The reason for that was he wanted to bring them as sacrifices afterwards. And we only bring sacrifices from kosher animals as a form of gratitude for what was going to occur afterwards. But all animals have a purpose. Everything in this world has a purpose. Every blade of grass, says the Gemara, has an angel that stands by it and pushes it with its finger in order to say, live. And so everything in this physical world that survived the flood up to this point in history is seen as special, as precious, as having a purpose. If it's true by every single blade of grass, if it's true by every single animal that we're blessed with in this world, it's true for every single human. It's reminiscent of the question of King David. King David asked God, I understand everything except spiders. Why did you make all of these scary spiders throughout the world, throughout history? And God said, I'm going to show you. One day a spider, that little creepy crawly, is going to come along and save your life. And that's what happened. Saul wanted to kill David, King David. He wasn't yet. He was just David at this point because he was scared of him taking over his kingdom. And David hid in a cave. A miracle happened. A spider turned up and made a big cobweb on the entrance. And his soldiers turned up and said, ain't anyone in there. And he was able to survive the soldiers of King Saul. I've always wondered about that story. By the way, to this day, I always heard this from my mother. You should live and be well. And I always tell my kids, we don't kill spiders. You don't like a spider? Put a cup over it and take it out. Sometimes, spider's so big, you need a saucepan. I hear. But try not to kill a spider, right? That's not halacha. But we don't kill. Trap them and release them, right? That's the way it is. We have gratitude to remember how a spider saved King David. And from King David is going to come the great Mashiach in the future as his descendant. Another discussion for another time. And so, we know that things changed and Noah has created a whole new beginning. And everything that we see that survives the flood has a purpose and has a reason. Let's go back to the first question we asked. Why is it called Noah? How did Noah get that name? Everyone's name, from Adam to the end of the Torah and throughout here, Jewish history, world history, you included, your name is going to teach you something about your mission. The word for a soul is a neshama. The middle letters of the word neshama are shem, which means name. Why? Because your name represents your mission. Avraham, Avhamon, he's going to save a lot of people spiritually. We know that Noah means nach, to rest. He brought a whole new plane of existence after the flood. That's his mission. And you can see in his name. It's going to be true for each and every one of you. Everyone watching now, whether on YouTube or on Zoom, every one of you has a Hebrew name whether you realize it or not. Maybe you have an English name. That's also going to tell you something about yourself. But your Hebrew name that you were given, usually the custom is to name after a grandparent or an ancestor or around a period of time that you were born. That name is going to reveal to you your mission in this world. Moshe, Mishitur min hamayim. We're going to see that later on, Moshe was pulled out of the Nile by Batya, by Pharaoh's daughter. Why? Because he was going to one who's going to bring people out of Egypt, and that was going to define his mission. Noah brought nach. He brought calm and tranquility to a very tumultuous and scary and dangerous world. That, my friends, is why Noah was his name. And that's why the Torah portion is called Noah. because God doesn't want to see destruction. God wants to see tranquility. And we're going to see that just like the animals were tranquil towards each other, so too, at the end of days, there's going to be another shelter, another ark that is actually going to be the ark of Mashiach. And just like the animals didn't hurt each other in the ark and leave each other to live at peace, so too we're going to see the lion lying down with the lamb. Some people take that literally. Some people take it metaphorically, but many take it literally and say that there's going to be a nach in creation. So Noah was also telling us how that in the future we're going to see tranquility in the world. Now Noah to this day represents mitzvot, but not any mitzvot, 7 mitzvot, which actually bear his name. What are the mitzvot that bear Noah's name? Noah wasn't Jewish. No one was Jewish at this time. We're not going to become the Jewish people until we reach Mount Sinai over 1,000 years later. We have 7 mitzvot of Noah, the Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noah. These are the 7 commandments that actually 6 of them existed before Noah lived. And 1 of them was added in the days of Noah. We have 7. And these are considered the 7 mitzvot of all the nations of the world. Why are people judged? Why were they judged in the days of Noah? There was no rule book. There was no Torah that existed. To what standard were they judged? They stole. Who says you couldn't steal? Where was it written? It was known. It was known from the days of Adam, don't steal. Because stealing is one of the 7 mitzvot of Noah. Let's go through these 7 laws. And they are, number 1. Actually, I'm going to use an acronym. When I was a kid, my Rebbe Yeshiva taught us how to memorize these 7 laws. And it stayed with me. Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Daled. Aleph is Ever Min HaChai. You're not allowed to eat the limb or even drink the blood of a living animal. Base is Birchat Hashem, blessing God's name. It's a euphemism. You cannot. No one in this world, Jew, non-Jew, can curse God. Gimel, Gezela, no stealing. There it is. That's the law they transgressed that made them liable in the days of Noah. Daled, Dinim, law courts. Every single society on planet Earth, from the days of Adam right through today, are obligated to set up fair and just law courts. That is an obligation. That is a mitzvah. So we have Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, and then the big 3. These are kind of held separately. And those are what's called the 3 cardinal sins. The sins that you're not allowed to transgress. Actually, a Jew should give their life up. One of the few mitzvot that a Jew should give their life up rather than transgress. And they are no forbidden sexual relationships, Gilui Arayot, Shvichat Damim, no murder, and no Avodah Zarah, no idol worship. Those are the 3 connected to the 4 that create 7. Obviously, well, actually, it's not obvious at all. Which one of those 7 did Noah introduce, which he received from the days of Adam, which had been passed down? What was the 7th one? The answer is, you're not allowed to eat the limb of a live animal. The reason is that from before the days of Noah, everyone was a vegetarian. Nobody ate animals. After the flood, there was a change. Humanity changed. The nature of animals changed in some big transformative way, that after the flood, we were permitted to eat animals. Kick in mitzvah number 7, you're not allowed to eat the limb of a live animal. And so that mitzvah was added to the 6 that preceded. And so the world is judged every single year in Rosh Hashanah. Not just the Jewish people, contrary to popular incorrect thought. The entire world, yeah. the Torah tells us, Kol boy olam, ever in the entire world, says the Gemara. That means every human is judged. Ke b'nei maron, like sheep that pass in front of the shepherd. They're all judged. What standard are we, the Jewish people, judged at? The 613 mitzvot. What about the rest of humanity? The Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach. And therefore, everyone is held to a standard. Different standard, but a standard. And there is judgment, and there is reward, and there is punishment. This week's Torah portion is telling us the dire punishment that comes to the world for not following the word of God. But, there will be tranquility. Actually, we know, let's jump to the end of Jewish history, right? Mashiach. Mashiach has 4 potential names. Menachem, Shiloh, Yanun, Hanina. The 4th potential name of Mashiach, says the Gemara, is Hanina, from Chaim, which means grace. Grace. He's going to be a person who has tremendous grace and goodness. Rearrange those letters, you get Nach. He's going to bring the same tranquility that Noah started at the beginning of creation. He's going to complete it. That's our 3rd and final arc. What started with Adam and continued with Noah is going to end with a final resolution at the end of days with Mashiach. And there we have the final saving of all of humanity, which Noah attempted to do. Abraham, we're going to see next week, did a much better job of. But Mashiach, a descendant of King David himself, is going to complete at the end of days.